Hello, for those of you that have joined us, we're just going to give a few more minutes to see if a few more participants will come to us so that we don't have to open again for them. So we're just going to give 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. But thank you all for joining so far. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get started. I anticipate there might be a few more people that will join us, which will be wonderful. Hello, welcome everybody. You are here for the presentation to learn a little bit more about the Michigan Community Center and Neighborhood Initiative Grant Program. From now on, we will refer to it as a Michigan Community Center Grant Program. My name is Jenna Holmes. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Community Service Commission. The Michigan Community Service Commission is part of LEO, Labor and Economic Opportunity as a department. And so on behalf of LEO, who is overseeing this, they have asked the commission to be able to offer the support and present to you the RFP and manage the process. So we're so glad that you're here with us today to learn a little bit more. What the plan will be is we will go through a series of slides and take you through the whole application process. Just a few housekeeping things to let you know is what we'd like you to do is in the chat, you can just say hello in there, say your title and the organization you're from so we can start seeing who's here. But I would like you to know that what we'd prefer is that in the Q&A, you can see that in the lower part on the bar there. This is where we'd like you to ask your questions. So feel free to go ahead and submit questions. And even if there's more than one question, do not worry about that. We will pause at different times and someone on my team, Shannon Zoot, who you see there, will be helping gather those, as also will be Denise Flannery. The two of them will be managing the chat. They might answer the questions directly to you, or they might be presenting those so that everyone can hear. So again, if you could just say hello in the chat with your name and your organization and your title, that will be lovely. So let's begin. So right now, as you see, what we're doing is, and Jason can go to the next slide, thank you so much. What we're going to be doing is we're looking at the $60 million Community Center Grant Program. I wanted you to know where the funding came from. It is funded through the American Rescue Plan Act, or the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, which the acronyms, as you know, that you see is ARPA, ARPA, and or if you see the other is SLFRF. So when you see those two acronyms, it's letting you know that that's what it's referencing. There are specific guidelines that the federal government has stipulated that the state, who then is overseeing these funds, must follow. So you have to understand that sometimes the questions that you're going to see and the application form may be something that you'll question, but I'll let you know that some of those are in direct response to allow us to be in compliance with the requirement of the federal government. For the state, they also have some requirements whenever they issue grants, and I wanted you to know that this grant program was initiated on behalf of the legislators, decided this is something that they believed in. They wanted to support those of you that are operating as community centers at the heartbeat of your communities and offering services to have access to funds. So let's begin reviewing what this program is about. The one question is, what can we spend the money on? What is eligible spending? If you've read pieces of this, you will already have seen that it can be for construction of new facilities or renovation of existing facilities. It can also be for you to acquire property. You can also do this for planning design cost, for construction materials cost, of course, for infrastructure, for your equipment and facilities. It also has an element to allow you to be able to do some things for programming and the development of programs in your facilities. I'm going to review all that with you and help you see the distinctions, but first let's look at the next slide, which is the timeline. So in the timeline, as you see, the RFP was announced. The deadline, as you know, is August 31st at 5:00 p.m. Based upon the amount of response that we get, we are looking to have a review process in September and October. We have selected that we are hopeful that we're going to be able to announce the awardees, on October 23rd. But again, we will let you know if that timeline has to change. The implementation of this grant expectation is that it will start the fall of 23. It can go all the way to 26. But the funds that you do have must be encumbered by December 31st of 2024. What encumbered means is that you have to actually stipulate and know where the funds go. So we anticipate that some of your construction projects, for example, the capital projects, it may take longer than December 31st of 2024, but will have to have already designated where those funds will be spent for us to allow you to continue, and then it can be up through October of 26. Some of your grant programs will be specific, and so they will want to and need to, in your choice and before. So one of the questions that has come up already is it possible for us to look at the funding if we ask for a certain amount of money for that to be over a 2-year period? The answer is yes, but we'll have to look at, especially with a program grant, to make sure that encumbered piece is what you can do. So we will work with you on that and help answer those questions as we go forward. So moving forward, let's go to the definition of what it means to be a community center. So the definition for this project, I do anticipate that your definitions may be different, but is a building or other place in which people may gather to receive support, services, and to participate in social, educational, recreational, and cultural activities. Centers are typically free and open to the community in which they are located and served. I read that on purpose because I wanted to be very clear and explicit. What I want you to recognize and know that I do understand that community centers may not be as we have had them in the past, where there's a building, a brick and mortar structure. It could be as for services, especially in rural communities, that those services may be in a library, and the library may have become like the community center for that community because there no longer is a structure. Sometimes it's a school, or it may be a university. So I want you to know that we recognize that community centers come in various forms, but what you need to think about is, are your services representational of a community center, allowing for the community to be open and coming to your services? I also understand, because I ran a community center in the past and was part of that type of a process. And so I do understand the fund development model for all of us is that you do have a certain part typically of the funds that you do have for programming that you do charge a fee for. And then oftentimes that comes with scholarships or free access for others. So the stipulation of our understanding is for people to come to your center, it needs to be free for them to come into the center. We recognize that some of your programming may have costs associated with it. But if you ask for funds through the federal government, you cannot then use those funds to pay for the whole cost, and then you would be charging a fee and making money off of that program. So I just want you to make sure that there's a clearness there. The other thing to help you think about this as well is, if you're a particular program that offers one service, let's say it's mentoring, because we believe in mentoring at the commission. And so if you have a mentoring service, are you truly a community center is what you need to think of. And or you might have a wonderful service and you do collaborate with a community center or those in your community or the places that you serve. And so that may be a new way for you to build relationships and be able to provide that particular service. But then it may be the community center that needs to enter in as part of that to make it a stronger project. So what you're going to want to be thinking of is, how do you make your project stronger to stand out, to be selected? So moving on, let's look at some of the goals. The goals, as you see listed there, I'm not going to read them, but it's very clear. As I said, the third one down, we want to recognize the vital role that community centers have as the heartbeat of communities and the importance that they have. And with that, we're going to be strengthening and looking at enhancing services, looking how we have, obviously, for the capital projects, which we think is wonderful, assisting all ages, youth, families, older adults through that process. And also we are going to be looking at making sure we track outcomes. So let's move to who are eligible applicants. This is who are the entities that can ask for these funds. So you see all of those listed on the top are the eligible entities. I've already mentioned some local government, can be municipalities, consortiums, regional and statewide organizations and nonprofits, faith-based schools, colleges, universities. We've listed those that are at this time not considered it, but again, some of the programming may come out of entities down below, but you would want to think of then how you partner with an eligible applicant, which is listed above. Moving forward, what are some of the grant requirements? So this is where, when I was referencing before, because this is a federal grant, one of the things to understand is there are legislative boilerplate language that was put in place, and it said it should be operating at no cost and open to the community. There isn't any true definition of what that means, so we'll be working with you on that, because I do know we've already heard from some of asking us, this is what we do. But remember that referencing I used earlier is you need to make sure that you are not using funds to then go and make money off of the funds that you're receiving for a program, for example. You do have to demonstrate there's a negative impact due to COVID-19. That is why the ARPA dollars are here. This is what we do need to make sure that we can demonstrate with all of our grantees. You also have to be demonstrating that you're compliant with state and federal regulatory bodies, demonstrate you're financially stable, stability. And then also, if you are coming in as a 501c3, you must be certified and demonstrate that. So moving to another eligibility requirement is, it was written in the boilerplate that you must provide one or more of the following services at your site. So again, I'm not going to read through all those. You can see those. They are in all the language that you see. And so when you get to the application, you'll be checking a box of all of the different services here that you do provide. We'll be also asking you for currently how many people that you serve. And then in the future, one of the things we'll be saying is the services you want to enhance or support through this project, and what you anticipate the numbers will be as a result of it as well. Let's move to the priority component. One of the priorities that was stated in the boilerplate was for at least 50% of the total grant awards, the department will give priority to proposals that service communities below the average median income. We do have a link in the application that we have provided to allow you to click, and then you can identify the communities that you serve, and then you can identify if in fact you are one of those with the 50% that we'll be looking at. It may be more than 50% that are in that realm, but a minimum of 50%. If you are not serving a community that this fits for, obviously, as you see, it doesn't mean that you cannot apply. You just need to know this is a priority. And so as a result, the department is also looking at this being a priority of looking at the Poverty Task Force recommendations, as well as looking at the ALICE population. So we'll be asking you, what are the ways that you would lift up people out of poverty and support those that have underrepresented, under-resourced entities, both in the families and then themselves as individuals. So I'm going to move to the next, and then in a minute I'll pause and I'll ask if there's some questions on this. So I have a couple more slides to cover before I get there. But the next one is, it's always good to know when the review process is there, what are some things that they're going to be looking at? You will see that there are questions that you will have, and we're providing with point systems, but I did want to point out a few. We are looking for, is there community support of the plan? For some of you, I know that this means that you've already done or will plan to do a community outreach plan, getting input, but it may be that it is your community support would be asking for letters from partners and from other entities to demonstrate that the project and the program that you're asking support for has support of the community. Ability to meet community needs, obviously, will be something you have to do, outlining clearly your goals. Another one is to consider the cost that you're asking for. It has to align with the number of people that you're serving. So as you know, and you'll see in a minute, the upper request can be for $2.5 million. But if in fact you're only serving 10 people, that does not align as well with $2.5 million. So those are things to be considering as well. Another thing was with energy audits, we wanted to let you know, because this is a building project, it is there are an option to have a building project for some of you. What we do want you to think through too is with the Governor's Michigan Healthy Climate Action Plan, there are resources that are out there for the individuals that you serve and for you to be able to look at how do you put and ensure that the functionality of your building is increased as far as either with renewable energy or more sufficient as far as energy facilities they have for the heating, cooling, and other avenues. So there are entities that can do energy audits. We're looking at trying to provide that as a resource for you at no cost. For every applicant, that will be a value for you as you go forward, and then especially knowing about these other resources that might be coming. So we're going to look to see if you have a plan to complete this on time. Is there a sustainability option? Are you thinking of that? Have you been able to leverage additional funds? That's an avenue that we're going to be looking at. Also looking at the organization cultural competency. Some will refer to it as DEI. Are you looking at that? Where is that going for you? And making sure that you think through as far to be inclusive of all people. But and then the last two is what I've already spoken of, which is how do we lift people up out of poverty and make sure that they are served. Let's now look at the financial element. So the financial pieces are that you are going to hear us speak again about encouraging you to blend your funding sources. Some have asked, can that be with in-kind? Could it be land is donated? The answer is yes. What can you do to put funding towards this as well as the funds that you're receiving? We are not asking for a specific match. So the value of this is you are not being required to have a 25%, a 50% match or higher. We are asking you to show and demonstrate for your community how have you leveraged funds or your own resources to make this project successful. Now, the other question that you have is, are you able to receive other ARPA funding? I want you to see the big capital. You are not able to do it for the same programming. So if you are having and have already received ARPA dollars for a capital project, you cannot ask for funds for this to do the same capital project. The same for a program. There's some examples that people have asked about, which is the M&A Relief Fund. If some of you have gotten that, those funds were meant to be for your organizational capacity. These funds are looking at projects as far as programmatic and then also capital projects. So that would not be an issue. But for some of you, you're going to have to look to make sure that it's okay to blend funding to make sure that you're in line with how that is all going to work. And then the last thing is obviously demonstrating the capacity to carry out the financial elements of the program responsibilities. So let's look at what this means as far as the types of grants that you can have and the total amount of money. On purpose, we put the lower element lower at 150,000 because we recognize that for some of you, it may be best for you to be able to have some funds for a program. It's not a big capital project. So the programmatic elements we anticipate might be at that lower end. It doesn't mean that your program might not be higher, but I'm letting you know that we're giving you a range. So all the way up to $2.5 million. So for some, you may be looking at what on the left side is a program grant. So I have identified 3 categories, but please know there might be a completely different category that you would think of for programming. So it's youth activities. There was a lot of bundling around ideas there. Community activities, of course, and community support services, kind of like what we sometimes think of as wraparound. In the program grant, you can ask for just a program grant. The other opportunity is a capital grant. And as we've already mentioned, it can be for new construction, for remodeling or updating your existing structure. It gives you an opportunity, especially if you do want to update your inside, your windows, your roof. What are those things that need to happen in your existing structure? One of the pieces, and we'll speak of that later, is they will be looking at why are you choosing to build new in comparison to why would you not remodel an existing structure. So for some of you, remodeling may be the best way. Also purchasing land. For some, it may be a recreation field that you need, and so you're going to purchase land and maybe even just put a cinder block building for equipment beside that land. And then also, as we said, for capital projects for planning and design. One of the questions came up is equipment in this? And the answer is yes. Typically, that would be under a capital grant. But if you have a program where you're trying to do a specific rec program and you're needing the bats and the balls and that type of equipment, that's different than the type of equipment that you would think of over in the capital grant. So again, you have a choice. You can do one of these or you can do both of these. But the total amount of money that you can ask for cannot exceed $2.5 million. So please know that if you are going for both, what that will mean is your program grant will be evaluated against other program grants for the amount of money you ask. Your capital grant will be evaluated against capital grants and the amount of money there. We will be able to see in the back end and join those two funding budgets together to see if, in fact, if you haven't asked for more than $2.5 million. So, okay, there's one last thing, and then I'm going to pause. The next thing is around the ward distribution. Sometimes the question is asked, well, how much money do you intend to put towards the program grants and how much to capital? What we've done is we put a 25-75% amount here, but please know that this is going to be a sliding piece because, again, it is based upon the grants that we receive and who is presenting that. And we want to make sure there's geographic representation. So there's a lot of other factors here, but we wanted to let you know that we anticipated that for the capital grants, as you would anticipate there, that those costs might be much higher. And so as a result, we wanted to put a little bit more funds in that. So at this time, I'm going to ask Shannon and Denise, are there any questions in the Q&A that we need to answer?
Yeah, so there are several questions about specific eligibility criteria or whether or not a specific organization or situation is eligible. And rather than answer those individual questions here, I know you wanted to direct them to get those answers a different way. So do you want to talk about that quickly first?
Yes. The one thing to know is this is an interesting grant. It's lovely that it's there and I celebrate it. And obviously with my background, I just think this is fantastic that these funds are there. But because of the way it's put together with both program and capital grants, I can recognize that some entities may wonder, do I really fit or not? Can I be considered a community center? And so as Shannon said, for your eligibility pieces, what I would recommend is, and Shannon and Denise will be putting this if they haven't already, we can put it both in the chat and also in the Q&A. If you could, maybe that would be valuable to put in the chat for everybody, which is the email address to send questions to. And then we can help you think through if in fact this is a right fit, or if it might be something for you to consider looking to see how you collaborate with someone else in your community to make it fit. Shannon, are there other questions besides that?
Yeah, so one more broad eligibility question. Are federally recognized tribes eligible to apply?
Yes.
Okay. And then there were a few questions similar to this. So can an organization be the lead applicant for more than one application? So if they have a community center in one community and a different community center in a different community, can one organization be the lead on two different applications?
The answer would be yes, but unfortunately that does hold you to that $2.5 million. So if you are the organization, as long as by supporting more than one community center or more than one organizational body that you're supporting, that your request doesn't go beyond $2.5 million, that works. Otherwise, if the grant process is going to have to be different, you might have to think of how you would be a lead on one and help support your community center in one of your other communities to be a lead on the other, if the request is going to be more than $2.5 million.
Okay, great. And then is one approach more attractive than the other as far as, review and funding decisions when it comes to new construction or renovating an existing space? I know you might get into that a little bit later, but didn't want to miss that.
No, I appreciate that question. For the federal government, I think for them, it's always asking the question. In fact, there's a requirement, and you'll see that later in the application. There's a question that you have to do a comparison, and you have to state, why are you doing new construction and not using your existing facility or a facility, a building that already exists and renovating it? It does not mean that new should not be looked at. I want to make sure that you hear that. It's just the fact that you have to, if you do have good reasons as far as why, then you just have to make sure that's very clear in your application. And then it just moves to, let's look at your plan and what you're doing. But we have to be able to, any grantee, we have to be able to demonstrate that we asked that question and that we have evidence of how you made that decision. Anything else, Shannon?
I think that is good for now. I'll work on answering some more in the Q&A.
Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start going through the application process with you. So if we start in the application process, the very next slide will show you there are some things that you need to do and required to do in completing your application. I'd recommend that you do that first. So you need to look at getting your federal system requirements, your SAM, Systems for Award Management number. That is something you need to do, which leads to also unique entity identifier. So there used to be a DUNS number, you might remember that. They have moved to using this UEI instead, and also your employer identification number. So do not worry when you start filling out your application, you can actually begin doing so. And if you don't have this number yet, or you need to update it for some reason and make sure it's updated, you can do that at the same time you're working on your grant. But I want you to right away identify if in fact you have the numbers and they're that what you need, because without it, you won't be able to submit the application to be considered. And that's also going to the next slide as well. Is there also are some requirements that you need to do at the state level. So to be able to receive funds, first of all, this is a reimbursable grant. And so for the state of Michigan, they will require you to be a vendor. And so you have to register in the SGMA. Many of you may already have this process, but one of the things I want you to think about is if you do not have a registration for SGMA, and if you have not done some of these other things that I've just described on the federal level, this is really valuable for your organization to do this, because for you to be able to access federal or state funds, these are things you will need to do. This particular grant in Leo has been choosing to use an application system called eGrams. It's an application platform. We had a review webinar for that this afternoon, or this morning, excuse me, and we are making that webinar. If you were not able to join us today, you will be able to view that at your own. And there's also a Word document that you can review. We will help support you, and there's a person, a technician, to be able to help support you in making sure that you set that up. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see this very quickly. And what is the process? So to be able to do this, you have to get into eGrams. You will have to go to their website. You're going to create your user profile. You have to affiliate and make sure it's with Leo, because if in fact DHHS uses eGrams as well. And so if you've ever done a grant there, your DHHS profile may show up where in fact you need it through Leo. So make sure you're using this link. You also have to find your application, which is the community center grant application. We also ask you to use a Word document that we're providing for you, which will take you through every single question, gives you everything that's there. It'll explain things. We're giving it as an open Word document that you can type your answers on. And so then as a result, when you get to putting this in the application, you just need to cut and paste. And then obviously finally submitting this by 5 p.m. One of the other things, so I don't forget this as well, is in other grant systems, you may have been required to have the official authorized person for your agency be the one to sign off on. And it did cause a problem at the very end for people submitting their applications. So we've shifted this to say that it is allowed for you, whoever it is that is the lead who is writing the grant and in submitting this, you may submit it on behalf of your organization, but it will be within a week to week and a half time that we will then ask for the CEO or whoever is the authorizing agent for your organization. They'll have to fill out a form and sign it, and you will have to upload that to be able to be considered and continue with the process. But we do not want that to hold up your application at 5 o'clock on the 31st. So now I want you to know that there are 3 different steps to the application process, and that is what I'm going to review with you now. So if we move forward, this very first step, step 1 and step 2, and you see I'm doing this as color coding on purpose. This step 1 is going to cover a lot. There are no points associated with this, but you must do it because it's the only way that we can identify that you have clearly stated that you have the eligibility to be able to consider and to move on and to be reviewed. So you will see that there's a series of questions. It starts with your application information. There are 3 different things. A little bit of, please make sure that when you get to project information, it already populates for the community center, but we would like you to actually name your project. What are you calling it? If it's such and such community center project, that's fine, but we don't want it to be just a generic name. So please name your project, start and end date, think about the funding. That is what's listed there as well. Also, your funding will be what you're asking for, and then the total amount that the funding will be. So if you are receiving other funding elsewhere, and then the contact information, The individual who is submitting the application must be in there, but we're asking you also to list the CEO and also list your finance director or your business manager, whomever does the finances for your organization. Demographics, you're going to see it's just a simple place of counties. Please know your state and federal legislators. You're going to be checking boxes there. Eligibility, many of that is just going to be checking boxes, most of that there. But the very first section of eligibility is it's asking you to read through and understand where resources are, and that you acknowledge that this grant that you are writing as far what it's for, and that you are proceeding on, with that. So that is step one. Now let's go to step two. Step two, what we've done is if you're applying, let's say for both of the applications, we did not want you to have to repeat the exact same information twice and have to write the information over again. So we did is we identified the questions that for either a program grant or for a capital grant that you would need to complete. So these in the gold section, this is a step two. And so these are things now getting into the points. So you will be having reviewers look at your answers to this. So what is your organizational background? That is 8 points. This is a great place for you to be able to demonstrate in your organizational history and what your intention is of how do you see yourself as a community center? Or how are you collaborating together as a community center? How are you serving in the definition of what we describe as community center? This is the place to be able to make sure you do that, as well as the other things about your background as your history of managing grants, as well as DEI, and then also the workforce development. We're not going to give you points for that, but it's valuable for us because we're in Leo that we would like to know what you are doing and celebrate that. And maybe there's even other resources that we can connect you to. Next is staff roles. Who's the team? The summary of that. The compliance and accountability. We need to make sure that you are there with monitoring, oversight, mitigation, and risk. Please know that you might think that it's a general statement. Of course, I would do monitoring, but you need to actually state it. You actually need to say that you are going to mitigate risk and how you have put systems in place to mitigate risk. Those are things that we need to show for compliance on our end, that you actually state those things. And so we're going to be looking for that. And then also, what is your data collection plan? So you will be thinking of outcomes of what it is you plan to do. And so then how are you going to measure that? There will be measurements we will ask you, but we will ask you what is your data collection plan and how are you going to present success for your program and your project. And as a result of that, we will ask for that information as well. The information that we collect will be pretty basic as far as the number of people served, the type of services provided, and then we will be putting all that together for you as soon as if you are selected. So let's move to the next one. It's still in step two that you need to now identify the community need and engagement impact. So you do need to describe how the community was impacted by COVID-19. That is a requirement at the federal government. It needs to be stated. Describing the community economic need, because this is the category that this grant is falling under, is the economic need. And so that's why that's important to describe your impact of your project, the demographics. Again, it lists both beneficiaries who you're supporting, your geographic locations we're going to be looking at, and then also the input of your partners. So we anticipate that you're not doing this alone. And so we are asking you to identify who are your stakeholders, who are your partners, and there's a chart that you'll be able to put that in. And there's one more section for step two that we're going to ask you to do. Go to the next one. This is now where you're going to make a decision of, and you can change that, so don't misunderstand, but you are going to check if you want to proceed on and you're going to go for the capital grant only, or if you're going to go for the program grant only, or for both. If you do choose you want both, then you need to check both boxes, because that is the only way that section in eGrams will open up to you. Each of these sections, what's nice in eGrams is there's a bar at the top and there's a box. And so you'll know you've filled in everything about being an applicant. Now you've filled out things about community need, etc. There is a section that lists just capital grant and lists program grant. One of those will not open up if you don't check both, if that's your intention. So that's step two. I'm going to get into step three, but Shannon, I want to double check. Are there any questions associated with this section at this time?
Yes, I think that I try to pull out some that were associated with what you just talked about. So I see that matching funds are not required, but do we benefit in the scoring by providing match?
You do benefit that you show that you are able to leverage funds. And it may be, like I said, it may be in kind. It's kind of, you know, that terminology that everyone says you want to see is their skin in the game. So is the community invested? Are you invested, and how? But again, we do understand that some communities, that there may be different needs or reasons why it's not able to generate quite as much as other communities. So that's one of the reasons we did not want to put a figure on this. We don't want you to have to be held to it. We want you to be able to say, this is our project. We do have investments. So there will be positivity if you are able to leverage funds or in kind in some capacity, because it shows that you have commitment. And you're gonna hear about this in a second too. It's gonna be asking about sustainability. So it would be difficult. We don't want you to have a project and it go away. If this is a one-off and you actually think that it's beneficial to only be there for 1 or 2 years, then that might be a different story. But as you proceed forward, we're going to want to be seeing how you're going to be able to sustain some of the work that you're starting. Anything else, Shannon?
Yeah, so if an applicant is interested in both the capital and the program grant, they check both boxes. It goes into one application. But will each of those be assessed individually or evaluated as one submission? So could you get one part and not the other? Or is it all or nothing?
They are evaluated separately. So the reviewers will look at program grants, and then other reviewers will be looking at the capital grants. So those projects, but there may be some referencing that you can do, right, as far as what that looks like. There is one section when we get to it is in your capital grants, there is some programming dollars that you can put in there, but it's more for how do you launch the capitals, how do you launch your project and your building to allow people to be welcome to come in. It's not for all the other programming that you need. So yes, they are going to have to be looked at separately to allow that to be fair for everyone.
Okay, and then lastly, there were just a couple questions about data collection and evaluation, outcome tracking. Can you just say a little bit more about what you're looking for in that section?
Yes, so you'll see when you get to the application, there actually is a section that's going to ask you your objectives, your activities. How are you planning to measure the success of that objective and activity? When you do that, you will be thinking through how you're measuring and the data you're collecting. So we will be looking at that. So basically, if you are planning to start a program in recreation, for example, that I mentioned earlier, if your intention is to be able to serving a certain number of students, and are there other outcomes, sometimes there's evaluations that you already have in place. We are not requiring outside evaluators. We're not getting in the weeds of that, but we do need to show success of what it is that you intended to have success. And I do know too, I've been doing this a long time. I'm in that generation that we do know that sometimes the success is that we learn from it and we actually pivot and adjust and actually make the program stronger. And it didn't actually reach all of our goals. So it's not that that's going to look at negatively if you don't reach all goals, but our hope and intention is that people are served. So that's the data. You have to think people-centric. Are you lifting people out of poverty? Are you accessible in your services? Are you supporting people to be able to take these next steps? Because again, remember, that's what the ARPA dollars is about, right? That recovery component. How does it have that thread that leads to that element? So hopefully that will help. We will put together, even while you're putting your application together, since those questions are coming up, we will put together some type of reporting information, et cetera, and that may help guide you as well. But yet we don't want you to be held to that. We want you to think through what will you do to collect your own data as well. Any other questions, Shannon?
Well, there are some related to the capital grant, but I think you're going to go into more detail about that. So I'll hold those for now.
Perfect. All right, so let's move on. And the step 3 of this is going to be you're choosing the program grant or a capital grant, or you're choosing both. So let's say you choose a program grant. So let's get moving on to that, Jason. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the questions, and it shows some point scale there. So you're going to describe it. It's a simple process of what is your design, clearly describing it, really getting into detail of what it is. I am not putting character limits on you as a result, because I don't want 10 pages. That's not going to help you. Don't misunderstand. But on the other hand, sometimes if you only have 120 characters, you're not truly able to tell your description the way you need to. And identify how the program is aligned with best practices on that section. That's what we'll be looking at. Moving to the next question. is program intervention. So describe how the proposed intervention is likely to lead to your desired outcome. Put that into words, describe that. The same with the design features that include reaching underserved and underrepresented and marginalized families and communities. So think of what is your program intervention going to be. And the next one is, it gets into that impact a little bit that we're starting to talk about. Is what are the goals? What were the needs? Explaining how the program design is actually necessary for the community and how this is going to be beneficial for them, and how it's tailored to meet specific needs that you know of, that you are the individuals that know of what those needs are. And so that's what you need to speak to here. Tell that story. And then also talk about the beneficiaries. Who is it going to serve? How? Identify the ages and demographics. Think about, once again, you're going to see us continuously talking about the people in poverty as well as the ALICE population. We put both of those terms in on purpose because your service may not just be meeting the needs of the ALICE population, although we think it is a really important group to be supporting, and maybe also lifting people out of poverty. So move on to the next one. This is where you're going to actually give your blueprint, is what we're calling it. So what are your objectives? So you may have multiple ones. It's set up so that you will be able to put an objective, the activity, who's responsible, what is your timeline of doing that activity, if there's any date ranges, some outcomes you're thinking, and then also measurement. So this is where you might more than likely have more than one objective that you're trying to meet with a particular program. And this is a place that you can actually start defining that. Next, because it's a program, this program also has to be accessible to people. And so how are we reaching out and letting people know? So what that means is, now remember, when you put your budget together, you don't want to put something in your budget that you haven't spoken of. This gives you the opportunity to talk about marketing, and then you have money that you can put towards marketing and advertising and outreach. And this gives you an opportunity to do that as well. So there are points that are associated with that to know how you're going to do that. And then moving to the next one is the sustainability that I already spoke of. So what is the way that you're thinking of sustaining this program? Are you, as I said, is that the plan? How would you maintain this investment? The funding that you're asking for, is how is it going to be maintained? And also, one of the things in letter C is, the commission knows this well, and I know you also know that for you to be able to be sustainable, part of that is people power. So there's the financial elements that you have to think about, but you also have to have the people power and the people that care and want to be part of this and bring others to you. And so as a result, we also want you to talk about sustainability from the volunteerism support. This is where I'm sure many of you are going to shine. And then lastly, let's look at your budget. So there is a program budget and also a budget narrative. So listed there are some of the things that are categories. So you can have salaries as part of that. That's a big question that people have. You can ask for supplies. We've tried to put some categories in there that we anticipate that you're going to need. And so as a result, what you'll need to do is you can list the amounts, but then when you do your budget narrative, it's not typing a lot of words in. You have to, if you've ever done a federal grant, some of you will know this process is what they look for is, if you have supplies, you can't just say, I need 10,000 for supplies. Instead, you would need to say it's for a certain amount of paper, or if it's a certain amount of equipment that you're using for such and such, for whatever the program that you're doing, you have to actually list what it is. And so think about that. Estimation is okay, but you have to come up with how you entered and decided on $10,000 in supplies. The same thing with trainings. That can be a certain number of trainings with a certain amount of that you're paying the trainers for a certain number of people. So those are the types of details that in your budget narrative that you'll have to list. And then the very last thing to make sure that you do in eGrams is make sure that you certify to submit it. This happened to people in the impact grant, that they were trying to get it in really quickly at the very end, and they had not certified. And so what happened was they found out that there were a lot of errors that they quickly had to fix. and then they got caught in a bind. And so I want to make sure that you know that as you go along, you can certify pages, but at the very end, there is a certification that you do before you submit, and make sure you give yourself enough time that you're checking on that to make sure that no errors pop up so that you don't get caught, like I said, at that 459, all of a sudden being finding out that there's some issues. So I'm going to move on to capital grant unless, Shannon, there's anything that you have right now for me. Shannon, are we good?
Let's go through the capital grant one so I can organize these questions while you're doing that.
That sounds great. Okay, that sounds great. Okay, so let's move on to the capital grant. So again, this is a step 3. Both of these are step 3s. Remember, this is for you. There's 20 points that's going to be given to your description. So it's all the way from the community impact, the program offered and beneficiaries, objectives. The 2 that I do want to hit for you is 5 and 6. This is what I started referencing earlier, is why is there a need for this capital expenditure? Why, if it's new or remodel, it's appropriate, and what's needed. And so you have to give some details so we can demonstrate that to the federal government that you did present that. Include an explanation of why existing facilities are not sufficient. So again, you already know the answers, but make sure that you clearly state them. And then also in the comparison of capital expenditures, if you are choosing to build new, that is what I was referencing earlier, is they are going to want to know if you did, there's a couple things, and I'm going to look into this and make sure it's a little bit clearer. But there is some definition from the federal government that is asking for you to be able to show a comparison. And as you know, the federal government oftentimes wants to be able to have 3 different comparisons and that you chose that. So if you're choosing construction company or whatever, but one of the things they're actually asking is, did you do a comparison of if you stayed in your current facility in comparison to building new, how you got to the point of building new? And that's what I was referencing earlier. So when you get to answering this question 5 and 6, please know, those of you that with a capital grant, this is an area I want to delve into a little bit more and ask for a little bit more guidance and assistance to make sure that we're meeting the federal guidelines. And so you'll know. So let's move forward. So in the new construction, what this section is going to ask you is it new construction? Yes or no? If it's new construction, then you're going to be filling out a scope list of what your intentions are for your new construction. If it's renovation, you're going to say yes or no. And if it's yes, then if, let's say, you're going to be remodeling the kitchen or doing the bathroom or doing the roof or doing that, those are things that we're talking about. Like, what's your scope of your project? If it's new, then it should be, we're going to be building a facility that's a such and such size to be able to have such and such. And so think about that type of a scope. Those are the types of things that you're going to be listing here. And then the same thing it asked you before is, how do you maintain your investment and what does that look like? And then for your sustainability plan, you're going to want to be thinking of environmentally what that looks like as far as energy efficiency, other things, because you're building or remodeling, this is the time to do that. And then also remember the same thing that I talked about before for capital grants, it's the same thing for program grants, is we anticipate your building is going to need to have volunteers as part of it. And so you should be giving us what is your volunteer structure. You can speak of what you're already doing and how you manage volunteers. Again, you just have to give us enough knowledge, information that we see that you have the knowledge that this is a piece of sustainability for you. And then moving forward, it gets a little bit into the clarity of scope. What this does is it gives you the ability to be able to upload some different documents. There is a site development plan. There is an ability for you to use a form that we've created that you can fill out and add that information in. A licensed architect or licensed whomever, depending upon the type of project you're doing, but it needs to be someone that is licensed to know, and they're going to be able to guide a lot of this information, like what permits, understanding the whole process, looking at how you're going to be putting it out there as bidding, and then even looking at as far as your scope and what that means too. So know that, I don't know what just happened. Thank you very much. But know that there are some different pieces here to upload. One of the questions came up of, what if before August 31st, by August 31st, you don't have all of this information? I am going to also help get some clarity around that, because I do understand that if you're doing a planning process and you don't have all your bids back, what we're going to have to do is, though, you have to come up with an amount of money you're asking for. So hopefully with an architect or someone being able to guide you and help you, you can come up with the size of the facility, where you're building it, some of those other things. You're going to need to upload some of that type of documents. Some others of you I know have already in the planning process. You're already at the place where you are ready and you have your schematics. So you just have to then upload what those are. All right. So we will work with you and on helping you understand some of these details. And there are some forms and templates we're trying to put together to make life easier for you here as well. Moving on. There are 2 more sections here for us to cover here. The last section for this is a narrative is about making sure, because you're building or remodeling, how is this accessible to people of all abilities? So it's asking to make sure that you get some feedback, to make sure that you've thought through that process. And then also, what are the unique features that you're putting in to ensure that it's accessible? And then finally, in your budget categories are going to be a little bit different. So we put in like some pre-planning, the permitting and planning, design and oversight with a cap of 25% of the project. What is your construction for equipment? Programming, like I talked about, events and instruction activities associated with activities to activate the site, not to do all these other things, but to get that site going up and going. So there might be some programming elements that you want to do there. Some of you may ask, can we have administrative dollars? If so, it's capped at 5%. But again, think about this. This needs to be who is overseeing the project. The other question might be, do we get indirect or overhead? Again, the issue is you would have to be able to file the NCRA or the de minimis rate of 10%. But typically on projects like this, the capital area projects, you wouldn't be using those type of requests or having that request. The budget narrative is just the same as what I described before. Make sure you have the details of what it is that you're presenting and not just say an amount of money. So the narrative isn't a lot of words. It's just giving the details of how it's going to be spent. So that is my last slide. And then obviously the same thing, if you move forward, what it does is it asks you to make sure you certify. So let's show our last slide. And then the last 8 minutes, let's just answer questions. So Shannon, I'm sure there's some program questions. There may be some capital questions.
Yeah, so several questions related to the capital grant. First, how important will renewable energy and energy efficiency be? And the example they asked is, how important is it that solar provide 25% versus 100% of the energy, for example?
Right. We are not putting stipulation on what it must be. We would like you to explore this because we feel that you're a beacon for your community. Because we know that there are resources coming down, right, that are, as you all have been reading about, for individuals. But wouldn't it be great if people learned through you as far as how you did it? So this is an opportunity for you to actually ask for some funding to do some of those things. It does not mean that you have to do solar, or do those other type of renewable energy, but there are some intriguing things that are coming out as far as what you can do with different boiler systems and other things that are so much more energy efficient and that will help you in the long run. So if you have specific questions about that, make sure, if you would like, put it in the email, and then I will respond directly to you though too. Go ahead, Shannon.
All right. Does the organization need to own the property, or can the funds be used to secure a long-term lease and undertake renovations?
Yes. So there is a section there that does ask that you have to have permission to be able to make the renovations, or what that is going to mean. So the question would be, are you renovating the building structure for another entity that owns this, right? And so there is going to be some concerns there. So for those of you that are looking to lease, and that is the type of building that you're in, I do understand that this might be the only way to make your structure sufficient for you. So let's talk about that. Please put that in an email to me, and then I will look into the challenges or how and what it is that the reviewers will look at in that section. So thank you for the question.
All right. And then if somebody is applying for a capital grant and intend to renovate a space that's in a different location from where they currently operate, should they include the data and demographics from the neighborhood where they plan to build or renovate, or from where they operate currently?
When
that make
you
sense?
are talking about your history, talk about where you've been. When you're talking about what your project will do, you have to talk about the demographics there. So it's a very good question. When you speak of the demographics of the counties you're serving, if that changes, and so no longer are you going to be serving all the communities or you're serving now, and your new location is going to be completely different demographic and who you're serving is different, list where you'll be serving. Hopefully that's clear. So you do want to have your history, but your project is your project. So whoever you serve or asking the money for is what you list there.
Great. So this is a financial question. You mentioned that this is a cost reimbursement grant. Is it, how often do the cost reimbursements happen? They don't have to have the full amount at the beginning, and then get reimbursed for the full amount at the end of the project, right?
Yeah,
Is it
so
monthly reimbursement?
typically what happens is, and I'm going to be meeting with a finance person next week, and so I'll be working to see what that schedule looks like. But typically what happens is there's different points when you have, if it's monthly, whatever, you submit your invoices, your costs, you can submit it at that time and then being reimbursed. But again, it has to be that you've expended it and then you can ask for those funds. So I will ask that and I will post that because that's a question that others have asked and it will be in the FAQ for you.
Great. And then since we have a few minutes, these were a couple of questions that came up earlier. Could you elaborate on what you mean by lifting someone out of poverty?
Good question. If you go to the Poverty Task Force goals and initiatives, I think that there's a lot there that they speak to. And it's having an eye to and understanding what the needs are in the community and those that are in the under-resourced. And so as a result, what we're looking for is your community center doing something? What is the pieces that are there to be able to support that? So again, what I would point you to is for you to go, if you have not seen the Poverty Task Force recommendations. I think that is some wonderful clarity that they worked really hard on that we would like you to review. You can also look at the ALICE population information and the data to be able to understand as far as those that are working and still struggling. So it's allowing, because some of the systems that we have here are for workforce development, career development. If you look at the list of services, the legislators ask for services that you're providing. So some of those services are actually going to be able to provide that. It might be providing food, right? It may be a lot of different things that you're doing to provide services to allow individuals that are under-resourced. So if that is not clear and you still have a question and you'd like more, I'll see if there's a way that I can clarify that a little more in the FAQs for you too.
Thanks, Jenna. Last one, I'm not exactly sure what this is referring to. It says, how is negative impact determined? I'm assuming you said something along those lines earlier that I missed. Do you know what that's referring to?
Yeah, so the negative impact is dealing with how has COVID negatively impacted your community? That's the line that the federal government has used. So what you have to do is there's a variety of different ways that you would have to explain and think about what happened during COVID. What were the challenges? How are people recovering? What did you see in your community? What are the results? So just tell the story of your community and the needs of your community. That typically will pull out. I mean, again, you have to think back through COVID, and I know it's been a while, but yet we still are seeing people. I mean, some people may be looking at doing some things with mental health, and we know that mental health is an issue and definitely for youth. So if your program is there, that was there before for youth, but yet it was exacerbated because of COVID. So again, what you need to do is you just need to tell the story of some of the things that happen in your community, the challenges that you face, and why you want to be there for them to provide them with services. Is that the last one, Shannon?
Well, just one more just came in. Does the facility or project need to be already designed in order to qualify to apply, or can some of that happen later?
Yes, it can be happening as part of the project, and that's what I was referencing earlier. So you can use the funds for your planning. So maybe this is for you to ask for funds for the planning to get community input. Maybe it's to purchase the land and to do that, and you're going to get that part done, and then you're going to go and maybe there's a fund development or something that you're doing for the rest of it. That might be one way to do it. Another way to do it is right now, as far as Is there planning going on? Have you already thought about your project of what it is that you want to do in the capital project? And so as a result, then see what you can do of identifying your architect and seeing what it is that you want to start doing. I will work on that in the FAQs because that is a big question that people have of what if I don't have my plan complete? Or what if my land that I'm planning to purchase is not completely purchased by then? Can I have a purchase agreement? So I'm going to look to see as many of those type of things will help answer that question as I can, and I'll put that in FAQs, but feel free to continue to send the email questions like that to the email that we've given you. And a lot of those type of questions, I'll be the one responding and helping you out with. Well, I know it's 5 o'clock. It's just 1 minute after. I like to always stop meetings at this time. 56 of you have hung in there with us. I know a few people had to go. I thank you so much for your interest. I'm hopeful this was helpful to you. Please know that what we're trying to tell you is the email that you see on the screen is the one that you should be sending to. We will be putting resources on the website that you can link to. There will be resources to get to eGrams. We will be helping support you along this process, but we wanted to get you all the information as we could as possible so you can begin thinking about this. Does this fit for your community and is there a need? So I hope this has been helpful to you. Please let us know if there's anything else. Feel free to put it in the chat or in the questions, and we will be responding the best we can to those emails. My hope is within 48 hours, but please know as there might be a lot of questions coming in right away in the beginning, it may take a little bit, but we will definitely get to you. So do not worry. Thank you so much, everybody.